Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Birch. And this episode is an advocacy and collaboration curated episode. The month of April is Poetry Month. And if you follow Advocacy and Collaboration Standing Committee on Facebook or Instagram, that's the ACDA, American Choral Directors Association Standing Committee for Advocacy and Collaboration, you'll see that we've been posting once a week about the power of poetry and how it connects and collaborates with our awesome field of choral singing. So this episode is really awesome because Rika, who is one of our committee members, brought Dr. Robert Bode into the circle as we were talking about things to publish and to create as resources this month, because Dr. Bode just published a brand new book with GIA Publications, Hearts All Whole. So I reached out to Dr. Bode, asked if he'd come on the podcast for this month's episode, and he sent me the book to peruse before that episode. I read it cover to cover in a single flight. It was so good. So in this conversation, we talk obviously about the powerful collaboration between music and lyrics as choral artists. But Dr. Bode is incredibly inspiring and also talks about teaching tools and methods and ideas to really spark imagination and creativity and expression. I feel like this conversation is two friends sitting down together over a cup of coffee or over lunch. It was such an easy conversation, and I can't wait for you to listen. This episode is sponsored by our friends over at Perform International. They are fantastic. If you were thinking about traveling abroad or any type of travel, reach out to them at performinternational.com. The link is in the episode notes, but I am eternally thankful for them. And spoiler, we're going to be doing a live episode from one of their tours in May. I'm so excited. All right. You can also help the podcast over at patreon.com/musicedmatters. All of the funding that is brought in by sponsors and from the Patreon page goes to cover the cost of hosting the platform, as well as sending a little teeny tiny thank you to every guest who's given of their time to increase our knowledge and our connectivity and our things that matter in music. So without further ado, Hearts All Whole author and choral educator, choral conductor, and my new friend, Dr. Robert Bode. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are talking to my new friend, Dr. Bode. Hello, my friend.
Hello, it's good to see you.
It's so great to meet you virtually. Y'all, Dr. Bode has just written this amazing book, Hearts All Whole, Reflections on Life and 12 Choral Gems. And I've read it cover to cover, and it's amazing. I'm so excited to meet you face to face.
Oh, it's great to meet you too.
This episode is part of the Advocacy and Collaboration Standing Committee. We have a monthly curated episode, and when it was recommended by one of the committee members that you and I speak, I got so excited because we're literally highlighting the power of the collaboration of text and choir. It's an excellent idea.
We're so lucky. Orchestral conductors don't have a clue about the excitement that we experience, because we get to have text, we get to work with words, and we get to work with music. I agree with you, it's the very best.
Very best of collaboration. So before we get into how you got your book started and where you got your book idea, how did you find choir world in the beginning? How did you get into this field?
It's a little embarrassing, but I've always known that I wanted to be a conductor. And it wasn't that I wanted to be a choir director. I just knew I wanted to be a conductor. And my parents tell me that even when I was little, we'd have family guests come over, and I'd make them stand there and watch while I turned on the stereo and would conduct like a movement of a Beethoven symphony or something. And I think my parents thought it was cute. I don't know what they were thinking. They probably were horrified. But I knew since I was as far back as I can remember that I wanted to be a conductor and I wanted to make music. So that has clearly been my path forever. There have been a couple of times in my life, say after my master's degree, I think. Yeah. When I thought, you know what, I may do something else. I think I may go into counseling or something. But it's the strangest thing. If you step off your path, or at least for me, when I stepped off my path, the reason that I'm here, then everything in my life was jangly and discordant, and it didn't work and it didn't fit until I took that step back into the path and said, okay, I'll be a musician. And then boom, it felt like, all right, the path is paved and let's just go. So I think I've known my whole life that I wanted to be a musician and a conductor.
I need to write down that quote. I just had to write the whole thing down. How often do we step off of the path that we're supposed to be on because we think, oh, this is going to be an easier route, or maybe I'll go this way because it's not as scary. It's the easier pathway. And then everything feels like it's tangled in knots. And the second you go back on your path, what a beautiful analogy.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. That's certainly the way it felt for me. And it's been easy for me. I mean, I've had an kind of embarrassingly easy life. If you believe in reincarnation, this is my life on the beach in Hawaii. And I don't know what the next one is, but this one has been, I have had some good karma stored up. So I'm enjoying the fruits of it this time around.
So how did you go? So you said after your master's degree, you considered counseling. Did you major in music right off the bat as a freshman in undergrad? Did you sing in choir in high school? When did you first start taking the passion of young Robert conducting the radio and put it into formal education?
Well, yeah, I was a music major at the University of Texas. It took me 5 years. The dean called me in and said, will you just graduate? And it's because I wanted to take everything. I wanted to take English classes and I wanted to take astronomy and but of course music things. So I grew up singing and playing the French horn. I actually went to SMU for my freshman year on a French horn scholarship.
Wow.
But it took like 15 minutes for me to, once I was there, to realize, no, what I want to do is sing and work with choirs. So I transferred to the University of Texas, which is where I grew up in Austin. Got my bachelor's and my master's at the University of Texas. Then I spent a year in Cardiff, Wales, mostly because I couldn't get a job after my master's. And my major professor, Morris Beachy, had a connection in Cardiff, and he said, I think I can hook you up with this university and this choral program, and why don't you just go spend the year? And I went, and actually the poor overworked man who was in charge of the opera and the orchestra and the choir said, here, take the choir. And so for that year in Cardiff, I got to conduct. And then from that, I applied to Cincinnati Conservatory, CCM, and got my doctorate there. I met my husband, Lee, at the first day at CCM. He was also in the choral conducting program. And he's a pianist, and we've spent our life and our career with our offices right next to each other. And he's always played for my choirs. Yeah, so that's a whole other story.
That's so cool.
But I finished my doctorate, and I did not take the path of being a public school teacher. I had a really wise, wonderful mentor at the University of Texas, Charles Smith, who said, I'm not sure that's the path for you. I'm not sure that you ought to be a high school teacher before you go to teach in college. If what you want to do is teach in college, why don't you teach in college? And I was fortunate enough to get a job offer at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, after my doctorate. And I was there for 24 years. Lee and I were there for 24 years. And one thing kind of flowed from another. But I did what I tell my students never to do, which is just go straight on and not teach first. And for me, it worked.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that there is sometimes that's the right pathway to go, and sometimes it's not. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, I really want to have that college conducting job, what are your pros and cons of, yes, teach high school first. No, don't teach high school first.
Well, I counsel people who come to me and say, I'm considering starting my doctorate. It's at that point that I say, it would really serve you. And I say this to everyone. It would really serve you to teach or be at a church or somewhere, have responsibility for a choral program for 3 to 5 years, because you gain so much by having that experience. And also then it makes you marketable, frankly, in a way that if you don't have that, if you just look good on paper, but you haven't had that life experience, it's hard to get hired. I think for me, it was a matter of luck. I was hired at Whitman College as a really late, last minute hire. A search had failed, so they called Cincinnati, and since my major professor at Cincinnati said, well, yeah, so there's somebody who could come for a year to be the interim while you do a real search, and and that turned into a 24-year stint. So luck plays a part, but when I counsel people, I can't really count on the luck part, or I don't feel like I have the permission to say, let's just take a chance. So what I usually say is, the better, safer path is for you to teach and then get your doctorate, and then from there, hopefully the springboard is strong enough that you can get a job.
I agree wholeheartedly. There's so many opportunities that have opened up because I taught middle school before I went back to all of it. And I mean, let's be honest, college kids are really like the middle schoolers of adulthood, which is why they are so stinking fun.
Yeah, it's really true. I mean, I have been so lucky that I taught at a small liberal arts college where I'm not sure I would have been admitted as a student, but I got to teach there. And they were bright and enthusiastic and motivated, and they wanted to, do. Then I went from there to Kansas City to the conservatory, where the students I taught were graduate students. They were intent on professional careers, and they were very, very serious. There wasn't the joy that there had been at the undergraduate level. And I kept having to remind them, what is it that attracted you to this in the first place? Can you remember that? Because if you don't have that joy, then what you're embarking on is a career that's hard. And now I'm at Ohio State, and I've been here for 4 years. And again, I'm working with graduate students, but also undergraduates. And their joy in music making is just so much fun. They want to sing well, they want to be proud of themselves, they want to do whatever I ask and make it as wonderful as possible. So here at the end of my teaching career, to be back with those sort of fresh, enthusiastic faces and voices is such a joy.
I love that. Good reminder, especially as we're in April and we're nearing the end of spring, the end of semesters, the end of school years. Sometimes it's so easy to get bogged down and forget the why we got to this path.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
So you share some of this story in Hearts All Whole. And I feel like I know you because I've read the book, and I'm so excited to dig into that. So we know you took a non-traditional kind of path with going right into what your heart's desire was. And obviously you had a lot of success, and you share so many great tips. What sparked you wanting to write this book?
Well, it's like everything else. You think it's one thing and it's another. I'm just now completing my final year of teaching. So I'm retiring at the end of this year. And about a year ago, I started thinking, well, what the heck am I going to do when I retire? Because I can't do anything else but what I said, teach and conduct. But I can also write a little bit. And I have a book of poetry that's a collection of poems that have been set by choral composers and as songs and that sort of thing. And I was really proud of that. And I thought, well, I could continue to write poetry and work with composers and that sort of thing. But I thought, maybe what I want to do is sort of write a memoir and just share stories about this life as a teacher, life as a musician, and tie the stories to the interpretation or thoughts about various pieces, such as Mozart Ave Verum Corpus, or Brahms O Schöne Nacht, or Lawrence and Schumann The Shining Night. And as I began to work, I got really excited, and I finished the book within a year, within 12 months, almost to the day. But that was still a year before I retired. So this goal, which was to create something for myself to do in retirement, I felt like finished it. So I'm now still stuck with the same question. What am I going to do? But maybe it's more writing. But the more I got into it, and, life works in such a funny way. And the creative life works in such a funny way that I knew I wanted to write a book about interpretation of choral pieces. And I made the decision. I would talk about 12 pieces, and I figured out what those pieces were. And I would start a chapter. Say I'd start the chapter on Mozart Ave Verum Corpus and not have a clue what it is I wanted to say until I started saying it. And then, like a gift, it just came. And I had that experience with every single chapter of this book, where it wasn't really planned, but what came felt so right and so natural that it was easy, and that's why I could do it in 12. So fingers crossed, maybe there's another one there.
Yeah, there has to be. What's so cool about each of the chapters, and friends, I highly recommend this book. I literally read it cover to cover on a delayed flight because it was so good. And it read like you're sitting right across the table and Robert's telling stories of life. It was exactly what I wish. I call you guys the path blazers, because your generation is who made the path for all of us that are currently coming up in the field. Had y'all not been those trailblazers whacking down all the weeds and making space for the power of choir, there wouldn't be this plethora of choirs that we see on the planet right now. And so I am clinging, as you guys are looking towards retirement, for resources like this. Because how else are we going to know how those paths got blazed? And so I loved reading your experiences and how you intertwined your memoir, but also gave me tips on how to interpret the text and how to teach my singers this and that and this little. And it wasn't pedantic at all. It was conversational and a story.
Well, thank you. And it's really just one account of my bumbling through one thing and then bumbling into another thing. My career, the book, approaching music has never been scientific. It's never been organized. Really, it's never been orderly. It's been a series of missteps and bumbles. But at the heart of it all is this love for music. And of course, I love words. And thank you for saying that now several times. That it's the book is about how text and music are married. And I really feel that is a real motivating force for me. But I got to tell you that from the very start, I didn't have a plan. I really guess I haven't much planned anything, but I certainly trusted the next step. And I think that's always really important for us.
What great advice, too, to just trust the next step. You've done the work. Trust the next step.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's
dive in. Our podcast is done.
No, I mean, that's going to have to be the title, Trust the Next Step. I don't know, maybe. There's a lot of great titles. I really love the title of the book, Hearts All Whole. And it wasn't until I had read it that I understood the whole subtitle. I guess I didn't know what I was getting in when I was like, Hearts All Whole. Okay, I can see how that might relate to the lyrics of these pieces that you chose. And then as you read it, you're really putting together that full heart experience. And you're just going to have to go read the book. That's all there is to it. But let's dive into it. So I really love how this is in the foreword. So this wasn't something that you wrote. This is something that your friend Melinda Bargreen wrote. So first question, how did you choose Melinda to be your foreword writer?
Well, I know Melinda. She lives in Seattle. And for 15 years, I conducted one of the best choirs in the Northwest, in Seattle, called Choral Arts Northwest. Mm-hmm. And Melinda was a music critic, was an arts critic for the Seattle Times. And so she often came to concerts, and I loved what she had to say. And I loved that she was so supportive and a really terrific writer. And she's also, since she's retired as being a critic, she's now a composer. And so I've conducted several pieces of Melinda Bargreen's, and they are so beautiful. I mean, just think of the richest, chocolatiest, warmest sonorities and things, and that's Melinda's music. But anyway, for all those reasons, I thought that she would be a really sympathetic reader. And so I asked her if she would read the book as I was writing it and give helpful hints. And she would say, and she was very gracious, and she would say, actually, it's not spelled that way, it's spelled this way. And just so gentle in her corrections and things. So after she had helped me so much as a reader, I asked if she would write the forward to the book.
Oh, I love those stories behind it, because these are the questions you can only get if you ask the author. So thanks for sharing so openly. My favorite quote from this part of it, she says, "How can choral conductors get the sound they want and need from their singers? There are no keys to press, no strings to vibrate. Everything happens inside the singer's head, and inside that head is exactly where this memorable book goes." That set the tone for the whole book, because I say that all the time to my college students. We sing in solfege because we don't have buttons and keys. And I hope to goodness that you can learn these intervals and establish your own process of button and keys. But singing musically isn't about buttons and keys anyway. It's inside that head.
I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things I wanted to share with you was an experience I had at a choral conference. And there were two things that happened at this choral conference that meant so much to me. One was Alice Parker, the great Alice Parker, was giving a presentation. She said this thing that blew my mind and has made all of the difference. She said, our goal is for a choir. Our goal is for a choir to sound like one person expressing the text. And I thought, yes, that is the goal. So that was one experience. But then the other thing was, Alice Parker is very popular and famous, and her session was full. But the session that was the fullest, had the most people and you couldn't even get in? It was a session about 20 new, fun warm-up exercises. And I thought, golly, I was excited to go to that too. And you just mentioned solfege. We spend so much time working on solfege and teaching sight reading and count singing and all of these things and warm-ups. And we think that that's our work, but that's not our work, because those things are all our tools that serve the real work, which is how to get our choir to sound like one person expressing the text. And that means to me that, it reminds me that music is expression. And that's what it is. And I will say that to anybody who will listen, because I think that really is the key. We get excited about the warm-ups, but really music is about expression. I think that's why our audiences come, because to experience us expressing thoughts, feelings that are human, that's a really powerful, powerful experience. So I keep thinking back to that conference and think, I want to use tools for their purpose. And I don't want to be just about the tools, although I want to teach them because they're really, really valuable. But the tools don't address the fact that music is deeply spiritual, and that music is humanity expressing itself in the most collaborative way. And what else does that? So
that's so good. And
thank you, Alice Parker.
Yes, but how you tied it all together. You hit advocacy, you hit collaboration, you hit the education side of it, the tools, but also the humanity side of it. The why do our audiences come? Because our audiences don't come for that perfect warm-up that you did that one time that connected to that one song. So they got that one interval and that one perfect phrase. They come because that all gels together in an experience of text coming out.
Yeah, that's what we our audiences get. I spend a lot of time. Is it that you want to express? What do we want our audiences to get? Because that is our choice. As singers in a choir or as a conductor, we get to choose what it is that our audience gets. Well, that's huge, you know? And the reason that is possible is you can perform Morton Lordson's Sure on This Shining Night, I don't know, 50 different ways. But each way is a reflection of the decision we make about what it is we want our audience to receive. And if we're not clear about that, or if we haven't had that conversation with our singers, or if we don't all agree somehow, or at least agree to try to express this thing, then we're really not doing anything more than just showing them pages in a score. It loses its power to move us and to touch us. So I spend a lot of time having my singers talk to me, and we make some decisions, and we try some things, and I change, and my interpretation. This is what we're talking about, right? Is interpretation. It's the result of choices and the result of collaboration and conversations. And for me, that's the most exciting part of rehearsed singers.
I love that definition of interpretation is the combination of collaboration and conversation. Because you're right, it's going to be different every time. And you say this in your introduction, that there's a certain grouping of pieces. I'm not going to give everything away. There's a certain grouping of pieces that you think every single college student should perform. And I was sitting there thinking, thank you, Dr. Ken Fulton. I performed every single one of those in undergrad.
Did you really?
I did.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is great.
I did. I laughed out loud when I read that. I was like, oh, you guys are the same. It was so sweet. I love, and especially Fern Hill. Oh, I could sing Fern Hill from now until the cows come home. That's a great piece.
It is a great piece. And you know what? I had the opportunity at UMKC at the Conservatory in Kansas City to perform Fern Hill for the composer, John Curigliano.
Whoa, that's awesome.
And it was shattering to me that he's embarrassed by that piece.
Really?
He said, I wrote that just out of high school. Why didn't you do something new? And I said, well, Mr. Curigliano, I can't tell you how much that piece means to me. And every time I sing it or teach it or conduct it or hear it, it's moving. And he was like, do something new.
I did it once in undergrad and once at my doctorate. And it's like you said, every interpretation's a little different. And so the experience of it, the same with, oh my goodness, it's not Benjamin Britten, The Crazy Cat.
Rejoice in the Lamb.
Thank you. Rejoice in the Lamb. Every time you do that piece, you have a different life experience. And I mean, it's Holy Week when we're recording this. Isn't that true with all the Holy Week songs too? We sang Allegri's Miserere on Maundy, Thursday, because that's when you sing that piece. And every time you sing it, you get a different experience.
Yeah, I had a lovely experience when I was teaching at Whitman. I was introducing Rejoice in the Lamb because it's one of those pieces I think everybody should sing.
I know, me too.
So I introduced it and we did a couple of rehearsals. And then one day at the end of rehearsal, 4 students came up to me and I thought, this is trouble. When they come in packs, you know that you're in trouble. So they said, Dr. Bode, can we talk to you? And I said, yes. And they said, we are Jewish and we just don't feel like we understand why it is that we should sing this piece and why you think we should. So what is your reason for wanting us to do it? And so I kind of shared how it was not meant, I wasn't programming it because it was Christian. I was programming it because it was human, and it dealt with human things in a way in music that is just so captivating and fun and moving. And they shuffled off, and I think we're not very convinced, but we sang it, and the four students came up afterwards and said, "We get it. We get that the experience we've had now is beyond whether it's Jewish or Catholic. We've had an experience of something that's art." And I said, "Yeah, thank you. That's it. Sure. That's right."
Yes. That's why we do what we do. Isn't it so cool? I'm so thankful for this book. I have so many highlights and bookmarks that I don't even know where else to talk because it's so good. I love how in each of the chapters you give us the thing, like all these different ways to approach it. You sometimes talk about tone color. You sometimes talk about rhythmic or phrasal interpretation. There was the one time you were talking classical music, how we all kind of overdo the early music. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's 2 chapters on, quote, early music. You have the chapter on Jacquin's Ave Maria and Palestrina's Alma Redemptoris Mater, and you kind of hint at the fact that we try to overdo it.
Well, yeah. So
talk about that for a second.
Well, thank you for asking. I'd love to. One of the things you notice is that music before Beethoven, before 1800, say, doesn't have much information. There might not be any dynamics at all. There might be a time signature. I mean, there is a time signature usually, but there's not a tempo indication often. So that's before Beethoven, but after Beethoven, starting with Beethoven's Third Symphony, there are markings and indications on almost every note. And the reason for that is that Beethoven was trying to express something that hadn't been notated before. He was trying to do something really, really new. And the notation and the conventions of music leading up to that time didn't really allow him a way to express this without putting it into the score. Now, before him, the conventions and the style of music making in the Renaissance and Baroque and early classical was so understood that the composer didn't need to write anything in the score except for exceptions, exceptions to the rule, exceptions to the style, which means that if we're looking at it, we don't see anything. Well, you cannot put a piece of Haydn, for instance, or Mozart in front of a choir and say, "Sing it, go." There's not enough information. By that, I mean, we need to write, this note is shorter than this note. We need to stress this pitch. We need to build larger phrase shapes. We have to put an interpretation into the parts, into the scores, or at least talk about it in rehearsal. So that means that when we see music written before 1800, we have so many decisions to make, and we have to write in articulations. Music after 1800 gets easier because more and more and more composers were writing interpretation into their music. To do a piece of Bartók, for instance, doesn't require any interpreting because he has given it to us. But Palestrina, Jacquin, even Mozart, we have a big job to do. And that also affects tone color. We know that from the Renaissance, there was a certain attitude about tone color, that things were not loud, excessively loud or excessively soft, that there was an ethereal, rather easy singing nature to music, very little or no vibrato perhaps. But as we go into later pieces, we have these choices to make. Should Brahms have the same sort of straight singing that we sing to Palestrina, or is that the wrong color? And we talk more and more about color as we go along. I play with my choir, and I will have them sing the Ohio alma mater called Carmen, Ohio. And I'll say, all right, good, do it again. But now sing it pink. And they look at me in that look that they have of like, oh, Dr. Bode. But then they sing it, and by gum, it's different. By gum, it's pink. And then I'll say, sing it mauve. And of course, one bass has to say, what's mauve?
What's mauve?
Okay, so then you tell them what about the color and say, sing it that way. And the whole point, of course, is that as singers, as choirs, we can sing anything we can imagine. And we can make any color that we can imagine. And all we have to do is invite it, and they will do it.
We
Did
get
I answer
to
your
sing
question?
anything. Yes, and you also are so inspiring. At the whole point of chorus is we can sing anything we can imagine. That's inspiring right there.
Yeah. Well, the other part of that is that a choir, at least in my experience, will give me anything I ask for. And I'm constantly stunned by what they're able to do. And I'm not just talking about skills, I'm talking about something deeper than skills. But I haven't had the experience yet, say at Ohio State, where I ask for something and they can't do it. So what does that mean? That means I need to be better. I need to be really, really, really good at my job, so that I finally asked for something that they can't quite attain. That's the challenge.
I always tell my students I learn more from them every single year than I just am so thankful that they help me grow. It's such a not stagnant job. You are always getting better thanks to the response from your singers.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
And their musical ideas sometimes, going back to that phrase a little bit ago about interpretation and how it's different every time because of the collaboration of who's in front of you and the conversations, it keeps our field so vibrant.
Well, it's true. Ohio State commissioned a wonderful composer, Will Averett, to write a piece for us after COVID. This was a piece we did on the first concert after COVID. And it has this long ending. It's a piano postlude. The choir stops singing and it's just piano that just sort of gets softer and more sort of diffuse as it goes. And I thought it meant one thing. I thought it was talking about just like the timelessness of music, that music goes out into the universe and just floats there and stuff. But I said, what do y'all think it is? And one of the tenors said, oh, I think it's just exactly like at the end of a Zoom class meeting where the teacher says goodbye and everybody shuts down at a different time. It's just like, and it goes away. I thought, I don't think that's what Will thought, that Will Averett, the composer, thought. But man, oh man, that's exactly what it is. And how spot on, that's what you think of, because you've been experience of going in class, that you would know what it feels like for the class to end. Mm-hmm. And then to think about that as being a musical.
Wow.
So great.
That's so moving too. Oh, okay. People need to go get your book. It's published by GIA. I'll make sure I put a link to all of that. Oh, yes, now you're holding a picture of the book.
This is the book.
It's beautiful. It looks so good. I'll make sure to put it in the episode notes. Now, let's do some wrap-up questions, because you've given us inspiration, you've given us application. I feel like this has been the best, almost like virtual lunch date in a way. We've had some really great conversation. I'm so thankful. I can't believe it has to end. Okay, so what are you currently reading besides your book right now?
I'm not reading my book, but I'm reading a wonderful book by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Gilbert. Yes.
Oh my! Do you know her book, Big Magic?
Yes, I know. I got to see her do a conference on Big Magic in 2018.
All right. Well, I'm preaching to the choir. The thing I loved about that is this idea that she had that creative ideas don't really belong to us. Our inspiration is not where these ideas come from. That a creative idea travels, and it goes from person to person, from creative being to creative being, until somebody takes it up and goes with it. And if, for instance, an idea for a story or a book, or whatever, comes to me, and what she talked about was that an idea came to her for a book, and she just really couldn't put it into practice. She didn't have the time, or it was not the right time. So she said, "That's really interesting, but I'm just going to let that go." Then, whatever, a year later or something, a writer friend of hers called her and was telling her about the book she just wrote, which was on that subject. It was that idea. And Elizabeth said, "Wait, that's my idea." She said, "Well, it's not. I got the idea." But it got Elizabeth to thinking, I call her Elizabeth, thinking that ideas travel until they find the person that will act on them. Well, I love that for so many reasons, but mainly it's because it says that creativity is alive and on the move in search of vessels, right? To bring this thing to fruition. So I'm 3/4 of the way through the book, and I can't wait to finish it.
It's so good. I'm so glad you like that book. Thank you for reminding me of that. I'll make sure to include a link to that as well. Are there any organizations or people that are inspiring you right now that you want to make sure people know matter?
Well, I am. This is the opposite of inspired.
Okay.
I've been so taken with what the Tennessee legislature did this Thursday in expelling 2 of their members because they had breached decorum by leading a demonstration from the well of the House, the floor of the House. And these two congressmen were bringing up the question, asking the question, what are we going to do about gun violence? Because Nashville had just experienced, just a few days before, the death of 6 students, about 3 students and 3 teachers at a school. And yet the response of the legislature was to kick these Congress people out. And I've just been so hurt by that. And, how we live in such fear that it doesn't even allow for the conversation. It's easier to expel people than to have the conversation. So I guess I'm inspired to be a little gutsier and to talk about things that matter.
I love that. The ability to talk about it and then to process it through music. Right after that Nashville thing happened, I was at an honor choir with a bunch of middle schoolers, and we had programmed Mark Miller's More Love. And they were just not connecting to the text. And I paused and I got off, they put you on those crazy podium thingies. And I got off and I went down and we just gathered around and I said, "Can we please talk about how I need this song right now? And you might not need this song right now, but I need this song right now." I was scared to get on the plane. I was scared to come to a city I didn't know. And we talked about it. That song came to life in a way I've never seen middle schoolers take in a song. And I had so many come and say, "I also needed that song. Thank you." And it wasn't that we talked about specifically what was happening, because it wasn't my place to do that for those students, but to at least open up the thought process for them to think about it. Man, that song was my favorite on the concert. It just sparked off the stage.
Yeah, that's a great story. And it speaks to their ability to be compassionate, right? That they really have that quality within them. All you did was it kind of invited it, and boom, they were happy to do it, and they wanted to do it. Right.
And I'm so glad it allows you to.
And they'll never forget that experience, probably, of singing that.
I hope not. On a positive side, they pulled all their leftover lunch money on the last day and bought me 4 Rolling Stone albums. I've never been given 4 Rolling Stone albums as a present. I've never been given a present from students after an honor choir, but they gave me 4 Rolling Stone albums, and one of them was a mono recording. It sounds sweet on my turntable.
That's so great.
Isn't it the craziest? So, very random, but you're right. Courage to stand up and say something.
Yep.
All right, last question. This has been so fun. I hate to ask the last question. What's the one thing that really matters that you want the listener to walk away from this episode with?
Well, if I can do two things.
That's totally fine. I would welcome that from you.
They both have to do with seeing. And the first is that it's so powerful for our students when we see them. And by that, I mean that we recognize and acknowledge their vulnerability and also their nobility. And who'd have thought that college kids could be noble? But you know what? You already know that middle school kids can be noble. And to see it, meaning that you call them out. You say, Jim, that was so moving, the way you just expressed that. Or I can see on your face that this really matters to you. Thank you for being open. So our students respond. And you can change the atmosphere in the room immediately when you acknowledge someone's nobility, their vulnerability, when you see them. The other thing is, I think that our job as conductors is to share with our singers what it is that we see. They want to know what we see, what our experience of the world is. And so we need to share that. We need to share that with our singers. What is it that Sure on the Shining Night means? What is the world that I experience? Share what we see so that they can see it too. I think that's why they come to us. And that also says to me that we need to devote ourselves to reading more poetry, to taking more walks, to going to museums, to developing our sense of beauty, because our students need to see that from us. Who else is going to model that if it's not going to be us? We need to listen to more music. We need to imagine more and more beauty in the world. In other words, we should live our life like a work of art. And doing that is the greatest gift we can give our singers.
Live our life like a work of art. Man, that makes me want to go to the museum today. What a perfect afternoon for that.
It makes me want to have a choir rehearsal.
Oh, okay, I'm coming. Whenever you have one, I'd like to come join. That would be a lot of fun.
Okay, sure. Oh, that'd be great.
Robert, this has been such a joy. Thank you so much for taking your time and for being such an great example of not just collaboration and the power that we have combining music and lyrics, but also as an advocate for our career and our field and sharing such motivational, encouraging, and tangible nuggets.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's been a joy to talk to you.
We are all work of arts. Works of art? I don't know. I'm just so inspired by this conversation. It was such a blast to spend a Saturday morning with Dr. Bode in conversation, just exploring the expressive power and the collaborative impact and the advocacy moments that we all get to explore as we spend time in conversation and experiencing music with our singers. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did too. I'd love to know what you think. You can follow the podcast on Instagram. It just turned 3 years old. The podcast is 3 years old, y'all. I'm so excited about it. But you can follow the podcast on Instagram. Music Ed Matters Podcast is the handle. Feel free to reach out to me, Dr. MEB, at Dr. MEB on any of the social media platforms, or you can support the show, like and review us, follow us over on Patreon, all those things. That's what keeps us going. Anyway, you know what? You're a work of art, and you matter. We all know that music matters, especially that powerful collaboration of text and music and expression. And I'll see you next time.